the Russians aren't daft. As the Ukrainians push a major combat power into this battle, then the Russians could put in offensives elsewhere. They could look to outflank them and encircle them as they're sucking them into Kherson. The reaction was very sad, actually. I had a lot of time for Gorbachev. I think he was, an extraordinary man in many ways. I did 3 tours in Germany during the Cold War, and in northern Germany as part of the 1st British Corps. We were up against 3 shock army, as it was called, as part of the Warsaw Pact in the Northern Army, or the north of Germany and into East Germany and so on, alongside other European nations and the Americans. And I remember very clearly the war coming down, obviously very unexpected. I think strategically it caught people by surprise. But Gorbachev, was extraordinary in the way he brought that about. And I do remember in the officers' mess, we all sort of looked at each other and thought, what are we going to do now? The Cold War had lasted 4 decades, a strong bipolar world with nuclear weapons, enormous numbers of nuclear weapons, had effectively, curtailed war and kept a relatively quiet period in European history. So I think Gorbachev was a decent guy. I think he was well-intentioned. I think he had great principles. I heard that John Simpson said earlier on that he tried to rescue the unrescuable. But actually, I think he faced up to reality. The Soviet Union was in a real mess, and it was not able to continue. So I don't think it was. I think he was a man, like many in history, the right man at the right time to try and do what needed to be done.
Yeah, in so many ways, the wheel has turned between the fall of the Berlin Wall under Gorbachev and where we are now with Putin in the Kremlin. And you were a soldier in uniform on that front line in Germany at that time. Is it your view, Tim, that the new Cold War, let's call it that by way of crude shorthand, the new Cold War we're looking at now compared to the Cold War we had then, there's a big qualitative difference, which is then, even before things warmed up, as it were, under Gorbachev, we were dealing with a Russia and a Kremlin that was ruthless but rational. Now, you could not call Putin rational, which is in its way more dangerous.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, and in those days too, we had this. You'll remember that we had this thing called mutually assured destruction, the strategic nuclear exchange potential, and so on. And we had academics and politicians understood that. They understood about escalation. They understood the dangers of moving from conventional war into tactical and then strategic nuclear exchange. There were relatively good communications between the leadership in the West and the East, and indeed quite good military links. We used to have a mission called SOCSMIS, Soviet mission, and a BRICSMIS, a British mission, that would be on either side of the inner German border. So people, they understood the reality, the harsh reality, and obviously the potential for massive destruction if there had been some sort of war in Europe. And there were a couple of times, particularly once in the 80s, when that became very close because mixed messages and people misunderstood what was happening. NATO had a very big exercise in the 80s, which the Russians were genuinely worried was a precursor to us invading them, surprising. It was never on our radar, but from their point of view, that's what they thought. But it was rational people prepared to think and talk to one another. There were communications, there was ways of establishing those links, and there were a lot of serious people who understood how the dangers of, what could happen in that Cold War. And that clearly isn't the case today. I mean,
Yes.
I don't know Putin, obviously, and I don't really understand how he thinks and what he thinks, but it's pretty clear to me that he is nowhere near as rational as some of those previous leaders, in particular, somebody like Gorbachev.
Yeah, which is a frightening thought. Let's now focus on the war in Ukraine.
Yeah.
And starting with the closure, the Russian decision to close the Nord Stream energy pipeline, which they say is a matter of maintenance. Don't know who takes that idea seriously. What about the effects of that? Because look, maybe it will last, maybe it will not. But I'm thinking more about the psychological effects on Europe.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt it will have a psychological effect. It was interesting the other day when they were burning off, and I don't know whether they still are, frankly, but they were burning off large quantities of gas. And it was almost a sort of, finger up to the West saying, we're going to burn this stuff off. We're not going to give it to you. And it's all part of a psychological warfare, in inverted commas. And I don't think there's any doubt that Putin does genuinely believe that if he keeps the pressure on, that the West is going to not hold together in the way that, we've been talking about over these last few months. So turning off Nord Stream, saying it's about maintenance, burning off gas, putting pressure on, there is a reaction. Things are happening. I can't remember what we discussed before, but in Germany, there are petitions that are being signed by people to say that this Ukrainian war needs to be brought to an end. Ukraine should accept the loss of some of these territories. There are those who are saying, we've got to open up these contracts again with Russia. And the reality is, the media and the politicians, of course, will say all sorts of things, but to wean ourselves off Russian gas completely is going to take a long time.
Yes.
And it is going to be a very tough winter, not just in terms of the cost of energy, but in terms of the ability of people to buy gas from anywhere around the world, the competitive pressures, and also the cost of living in the round. So I think it's going to be a lot of pressure on politicians in the coming weeks and months. I would not be surprised at all to see less support to Ukraine, and which is why this Battle of Kherson is so important.
Yes.
Militarily, it's obviously important. They're trying to recapture the city, and that's not going to be easy. And as I know I've said with you before, conducting defensive operations is one thing, but to conduct offensive operations in a city environment, what we call fibula, fighting in a built-up area, is really difficult. One of the hardest aspects of warfighting. It sucks in huge numbers of people, large numbers of casualties inevitably, and keeping command and control in that sort of environment is really difficult. So we've seen the Russians struggling to do this. We're now watching Ukraine have opened up this attempt. Now, why have they done it? Clearly, they wish to retake the city, but from a military point of view, it's not a major offensive across a wide area of the Donbass or the eastern provinces. It is a relatively focused campaign to retake the city. But the important message, I think, is the political message that the Ukrainians, and in particular the president, wants to send to the West, which is we can win this. We can recapture. If they can recapture that city, it sends a really powerful message to the West. Please hang on. Don't give up. Don't put pressure on us to stop the fight. We can regain all this lost territory using the weapons that we've been giving them and so on. But it'll be very interesting to see how these next 2 or 3 weeks pan out. And I don't want to be pessimistic about it. I hope they are successful, and I hope they're successful very quickly. But it isn't going to be easy.
So the key message here then is, look, this war, like all war, in the end ends in talking. But when that time comes, whenever that time comes, it is absolutely all important that Ukraine is in a position of strength. And that means this particular operation succeeding at least to the extent of showing, well, that the Russian presence on the south of the country can be contained, and maybe even to the point that Russian forces in Crimea could be isolated. Does it come down to that?
Yeah, it is exactly as you say. It is very important that Ukraine is in a strong position to negotiate from strength, as opposed to from weakness and collapsing. And it's debatable about what they are prepared to negotiate around, but undoubtedly to secure this city and to put pressure on elsewhere. And indeed, as you say, put pressure on the Crimea. They've been taking out some bridges. They've been conducting special forces raids and using long-range artillery and so on. Just means that if and when they get around the negotiating table, they're able to, they've got some strong cards to play. Now, let's not, again, I hate to be sort of, I'm not, pessimistic about it, but I'm not, I don't want to be overly optimistic either. But the Russians aren't daft. As the Ukrainians push a major combat power into this battle, then the Russians could put in offensives elsewhere. They could look to outflank them and encircle them as they're sucking them into Kherson. So there are all sorts of military ways of dealing with this, and there must be, however daft they've been so far, the Russian generals, must have thought through how they're going to combat this and how they are going to react to it in order that they are, maintaining a position of strength. So yes, the Ukrainians want to secure this city. They want to be able to say, we can hold firm, we can push back, we can retake these places. Please stick with us and don't allow us to wither on the vine. But at the same time, the Russians are not going to submit to this easily, and we need to be balanced in our perception of what is happening here.
All right. So